Okay, I think we're up and running. I'm just going to invite Lisa in just a moment here, and we'll bring her up. Today we have Lisa Mason Ziegler, a 25 plus year flower farmer, who's going to do a live Q&A with us. If you have any questions, be sure to submit them as we jump into this live call here. So let me first bring Lisa on, and we'll kind of hear her startup story, how she got started in farming, and then start running through our questions from the audience. All right. Welcome to the stage, Lisa.
Hey, John. Great to
Hi.
see you again.
Yeah, you as well. I just want to start things off by just getting a little bit of a background story. I know we've worked together in the past, and I know some of your background story, but just really, where were you prior to starting your flower farming journey? Actually, let's do this. Let's see where you're at right now. So how would you describe where you're at today? And then we'll go back and hear the background story.
Sure. So that innocent start of a flower farm has led to finding my way as a teacher and mentor to many, many people. I've discovered that my greatest gift is teaching. I'm the owner of the platform called thegardenersworkshop.com, which has grown into kind of an education resource bank and equipment. And it has everything you need to get started or to grow your flower farming business. I'm an author. I've written 3 books, authored a bunch of online courses. And I still have my little flower farm in the middle of the city. And we no longer sell flowers, as we have just totally taken the top off of education and helping other people, teaching and just supporting the next generation, as we say, of flower farmers.
Yeah, sure. All right. And over this 25-year journey, if you can go back to what sparked the idea, what job were you in? Where did this kind of seed of interest begin?
Sure. So I was heavily involved in the sport of dogs before I got into flower farming,
Wow.
golden retrievers specifically, doing dog shows, obedience trials, hunting trials, tracking dogs, all that kind of stuff. And I got a job at a veterinarian hospital and quickly moved up the ladder and ended up being the business manager of a very busy animal hospital where I stayed for 15 years. Loved my job, loved the man that I worked for. And just because it was all about educating people too. We're really finding the line of where I came from just comes right along with what I'm doing in flower farming. Then I met a guy who actually lived on this place that I farm now in the middle of the city. And it was like a gardener's haven. Brought me here for lunch one day and just saw these amazing gardens. And believe it or not, at the same time, my grandma had had a major stroke, and my day to go stay with her was on Tuesdays. And so what do? You read magazines. Well, I read a magazine and stumbled on an article by Lynn Bazinski about flower farming. It's like, flower farming, what the heck is that? And literally read it about 100 times, ordered the little booklet, which, by the way, I just found the other day. It's like a 10-page how to grow $15,000 or more on a half acre or less, and ordered it and literally followed what she said to do, and launched my first little working cutting garden. I was a big vegetable gardener then. I had married a vegetable gardener. So he came with, tillers, a dump truck to go get compost and all these wonderful things. And it's just kind of unfolded literally from reading that first article and then just following the one that went before me, and it just blossomed from there.
Whoa. So from an article, that's what spurred the interest. So there was some interest in gardening. Your husband was interested in vegetable gardening. You had this access to what I imagine was kind of a grass backyard, and you just started putting pieces together off of that article.
Well, it's so funny you would say that. So I was going to visit my grandma every week, and I thought, I lived in a shady neighborhood where my home was. No sunlight, not a ray of sunshine in sight. So, of course, I'm dating Steve during this time, and I said, how about I put a row of zinnias in next to the corn, and then I can cut those flowers and take them to my grandma's each week. Well, I planted a 10-foot row, single row of zinnias, and it was absolutely phenomenal how many flowers it produced. And I just kept cutting them. And, I'm such an over-prepared person. I had actually already lined up because everybody at the nursing home was loving the flowers. I'd already asked a neighbor who had a flower garden here in this neighborhood, if I ever run out of flowers, can I come cut from your field? Well, that never happened. That little 10-foot row of zinnias just sparked a wildfire. Because I'll tell you, John, when my granny was in a nursing home, she was totally paralyzed, and her room was all the way at the end of a hall that I would say is more than a football field long. And when I would walk in with just that little, just simple zinnias, people that had never spoken to me, because I go there every week, right? People that had never looked up from what they were doing, or just staring off into the wild blue yonder. Those flowers woke those people up. And what actually happened after that first trip down that hall was I actually had people follow me to my grandma's room and walking up to me and saying, my mom grew zinnias, and we actually were just blessed enough that a nurse told us later that one of the men that walked up and spoke to us hadn't spoken in a year. And those
Wow.
flowers brought it out. And that just lit me on fire, is always having those flowers for that. And then, I found my first place to sell, and it just, I was so well received. It made it really easy to keep growing. Because I just literally followed the steps that she recommended, and it ushered me into the right place.
Yeah, and your masterclass inside the community, you mentioned that you always had customers before you had the flowers.
Yeah.
So what did that it sounds like the nursing home and going to visit your grandma was that opportunity to find people that were interested, not only to give it away for free, but you probably stirred some kind of interest in how can I buy these? Is that kind of how you got your first customer or?
No, actually, I did not sell any flowers in that circumstance. However, their interest is what drove me to really think, people really love flowers. It
Mm,
really fueled me. And then sitting in that nursing home again, I read about a new, it was called Heirloom Botanica. It was like a new little antique kind of store that was launching that sold plants. And I thought, wonder if they'd be interested in selling my flowers. So I packed up some of my flowers. They were the very first place that I ever sold. Packed up some flowers and took them over there, and they loved them. And they bought them on, did consignment with them. And that was my first customer. Didn't sell a whole lot of flowers, but it was a start, you know.
mhm,
And
mhm.
then I just romanced my very first florist, really following the steps that Lynn had outlined. And they literally bought everything that I could grow. And that just launched me into growing a lot. And then the worst thing that could happen to, a business person is I lost that first customer, and I had put all my eggs into that basket. The guy that was
Oh,
my buyer, worked there. He didn't own it, and he got fired.
mm.
And
Oh,
I realized overnight I have to have more customers. And that really, I'd already was in that mindset, but I never really had time to pursue it because I was so busy now growing all these flowers, right? And that's when I started always looking for more and more customers, even if I didn't really even have flowers to sell to them. I kind of like, look at this, this is what I do. Would this be something that interests you? And they'd say, yeah. I said, well, let me put you on my wait list. And, when they hear
mm.
that kind of stuff, that even sparks them even more. And that just began that roller coaster ride of romancing more customers at all. That was a big part of what I did all the time.
Yeah. Did it just come naturally to you? I mean, every business owner's
Mm.
got their own strengths. Was selling something that came natural to you in the beginning?
No, not at all.
Okay.
And so one of the things that I learned from the beginning was to go in prepared, to drop off samples to your very first, floral customer. And that's what I did with Heirloom Botanica, and that's what I did with my first florist. I walked in with voluptuous samples to leave, even though he wanted to pay me for them, that first order. And then to have, here's my information. I'm going to send you a list every Tuesday morning at 8 o'clock, because I'd already asked him, when do you get into your shop? And in just a casual conversation. And I said, I'm going to fax you, back in the day when we faxed, I'm going to fax you a list at 8 o'clock, and I'll follow it up with a call. It'll have the list, what I have, what colors they are, how much it is, and I'll call you and see if you want anything. And I just took, because I'm very not anti-salesy, but I was afraid of selling too. You're not selling, you're just presenting the facts in a very
Mm.
positive light, making it easy for them to decide what to do. I've seen, and I see it on social all the time, people cold calling and actually asking the customer, how much would you pay me for this? There is no worse way to start a relationship off than that. And I had already knew to find out and how to research what the market prices were, so you don't come in low ball or high ball, and just do the best you can. And that really helped. And I'll tell you, when you connect with a strong customer, meaning they have a good business, they're busy. He literally took me under his wing, and he gave me invoices from the wholesaler. So I knew how to price my flowers, because he wanted me to be successful, because he wanted my flowers.
Mm.
He knew that the picture was bigger than him, and that it would grow that way. And so I just really felt like, me being a pro, even though I wasn't, I just went in looking like a pro, following the steps that had been suggested. They thought, okay, this is somebody that we can rely on. She has quality. That's what those samples proved.
Mhm.
And from then on out, I literally pretty much, there's obviously slow times of the season when maybe you didn't sell it all. And doesn't matter how many customers you have, it's just the slump. If you don't have standing orders, that's in July and August. In the flower farming world, everybody's on vacation. They aren't getting married. They aren't having big parties. And it just really worked out that I was able to always, and because of my success, it fueled you to approach more people. It's like, once you do it and see you're not going to die trying to sell something to somebody,
Mhm,
it's that
mhm.
scary, right? I mean, it is just so frightening. And I'll just tell you, just really quickly, the little story of how that happened. So the first samples that I walked into that flower shop with were hydrangeas, which we live on Steve's grandparents' homestead, and Grandma Ziegler had planted all these hydrangeas, and I had sweet peas, one of the most beloved flowers ever.
Hmm.
I walk into this shop, which I had already stalked them to see who was the boss and, what's going on there. I didn't just walk in there cold calling out of the blue. I walked in with my voluptuous buckets of flowers, and thank goodness he was on the phone talking to a customer with his back to me. So that allowed me to walk in. I put my flowers up on the counter, and I will still never forget it. He turned around, because he heard the buckets at the counter. He turned around and said to his customer, "Hold, please. I'll buy them all," and jumped right back on the phone. And I'm like, uh, I'm not here to sell you the flowers. I'm here to leave you samples. I didn't even have an invoice with me. And so that gave me a minute to get myself together, because he's still on the horn. Got off the phone, gave me my little spiel, and he said, "I'll buy everything you have. Let's work this out." And he really helped me to become a pro. And when you are show signs of being a professional people want to connect with you. And I just
Mhm.
can't emphasize that enough, because I see a lot of people burn their bridge out of ignorance and naivety, because they aren't trained. They just think they grow great flowers, they cut them, throw them in a bucket, and show up at a flower shop. It just is not that simple, you
Mm.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so cool. It's inspiring to hear because you also brought value to them, right? Like you're bringing samples to them. So there was a reciprocal reason why you'd be there, right? You're not just there hard selling them. Here's my
Right.
card. It's like, here's a freebie. Oh, this is awesome. I could use this in my designs today. It's you're
Exactly.
immediately providing value. So it makes it less
And
scary too, right? It's like,
yeah, and
yeah.
I mean, it proves to them what the samples are all about. Not only, and I've learned different ways to do it now. Now I tell my students, you walk in with the flowers not in buckets. in your arms with the flower heads facing where you're walking towards. And you're not taking just one or two little bunches. You're being generous. You want to like them to put down what they're doing or get off the horn and come and say, "Holy cow, what is that? Who are you? Where did these come from?" That's
Yeah.
what actually happens. And but what you're proving is the quality of your flowers, that they're conditioned, that they're going to last. Because that's the worst thing for florists. It's like, how do they even know that these flowers from this person that probably doesn't even know what they're doing, the way people come in and present themselves? Why would I pay them top dollar for their flowers? Well, I'm going to prove it to them, and I'm not asking them for a dollar. You know,
Mhm.
it's called investment, I think, right? Return on investment. That's where that's going.
Yeah, yeah, and it's like the thought process of people can't buy from you if they don't know about you, right? So you got to make
Right.
yourself known first. So walk into that store that you've never, met that person before. Maybe they want to buy from a local farm, they just don't know you exist, right? We
Yeah.
think we build the website or create the business and everyone knows we exist. It's not the case. You have to make sure you're known in your circles. So that's really cool. Before we hop into the questions, I have a list of questions here, but before we hop into those, what did that look like? So now you've got your first few customers. How do you do
Mm,
this for 25 years? What enterprises did you take on? How did the size
gracious.
of your farm change? And yeah.
So for the first decade of my farm, I had 2 quarter-acre gardens. So we'll just call it a half an acre, but they were split. One was in the side of my front yard, and the other one was in our backyard. Um, I was a one-man show then. I'm in the city, so I have no hoop and greenhouses. I did not have a tractor. And you have to know the place that I farm, which was Steve's grandparents' homestead, was composted and leaf molded for like 80 years before I got here. So it's like you show the soil a pack of seeds and they practically grow, right? That's literally, I know how blessed I am to have this soil that we have here. But if I had not continued Grandpa's journey of feeding the soil with great organic matter, it would be dead dirt in no time, right? And so I planted incredibly intensive. The first year, you don't know what you're doing. And we didn't have the resources like we have now. I mean, John, you're young too. It's like, I'm not young. A lot of your probably followers are. When I started flower farming, we barely had the internet. Can you
Mm,
even imagine? So there weren't all these resources. It was magazines and books that we were relying on. And I really didn't know about setting up a garden to be weed preventative instead of pulling weeds and all of these things. But I did get it right from the beginning about adding stuff to the garden because there were so many piles of leaf mold on this property when I married Steve and then moved in here. It was like, what are all these piles of stuff? It's like, women, that's a mess. We're getting that out of here.
mm,
He said, no, that's for and then old guy neighbors are like, no, man, that's what Steve's grandpa, that's what he puts in the garden, to keep it alive. And I'm like, soil's alive? Well, who's been feeding it since grandpa left? And anyway, so I really focused on feeding the soil, preventing weeds, and planting so intensively, more and more intensive every year, because I needed more flowers without, um, you know, with having no more access to space. So I just kept planting and planting tighter and tighter and squeezing more harvest out of the smaller space. And I tell you, I attribute my great success in small farming is I was forced to do it. I had to learn how to squeeze most flowers out. So I planted both of those quarter acres, stern to stern, as much as I possibly could. I wasn't such a great succession planter back then, which we do now, which just doubles what we get from our gardens. And we grew primarily annuals, low investment, high return. If I had planted perennials and woodies and bulbs in the ground, I'd have run out of space with very
mm,
short harvest windows. And so I was seed starting, planting, maintaining, harvesting, bunching, selling, delivering all by myself for 5 days. Back then I worked from sun up to sundown 6 days a week, and just about croaked. Then I hired my first help about 7 or 8 years in. Should have done it sooner. That's always the case, right? And got help at the markets. I was selling at farmers markets by then, and it just escalated. We always had waiting lists of florists. As we served at the end of my selling career, we sold to 23 florists, 2 supermarket chains. Each chain we sold to as many stores as we wanted, but on average 6 stores per chain. Did a big bouquet subscription, did a members only market, and we just kind of sold a whole lot of flowers. And supermarkets. And supermarkets are what kind of took over our farmers market presence. After we sold at farmers markets for 14 years, and farmers markets can be just a marketing platform if you play it right. So some of the stuff that I would do is, being in the city really limits me. I have a lot of city ordinance I have to follow. And so, I wanted to just kind of reach my customers more and more. And so I started offering once a month, a free workshop on my farm. I could only have 30 people because that's all I could park on my property, was what limited us. And it just endeared us to customers. And of course, we had stuff here to sell to them. And that just helped us build our business so very, very much, and built our community. Because back then, it wasn't like now where we have these online communities, and it was all done in person. And so it just kind of ramped up out of control, John. And then by the time we were in high production, I think we had 7 or 8 people here working. My farm then had an acre and a half in working garden. So we went from a half an acre to an acre and a half, then got a tractor, got implements that allowed us to just quadruple literally our production, literally overnight, because we could do everything with so much less labor. And we were producing 10 to 15,000 stems of flowers a week, about 5 months out of the year. And
Wow.
it was a wild time, but it was so great and so good. It was hard work, but we all loved it. We loved it, and we made some money, and it just opened a lot of doors to a lot of other opportunities for us. And growing flowers is just the best. It can be what you make it, is what I'm trying to say to you, as little or as big as you want it to be.
Yeah, and I think it's good to keep in mind, like you kind of breathed over it, like, oh, 7 years up by myself, but you were starting small and staying consistent, and you slowly built that customer base, and then isolated to the enterprises you wanted to focus on. Maybe they're the most life-giving or the most profitable over the years of doing that. But I think it's just so important for people to realize, start small and be consistent. Don't think it's going to be an overnight success when you're starting your first farming endeavor, right? But have the audacity to step into that first florist studio, and put that first seed in the ground and make those first steps. Only you can believe in your dream first, right? So it's cool to hear how you did that, and how we can now fast forward 25 years later. I know some of your story is that you started educating other gardeners and then sharing your tools and your tips, and then it moved into online courses and education, and now an actual online store where they can buy these different tools, seeds, and products from you. So it sounds like it's been a journey, and one that you've adapted with, and didn't really have much resources in the beginning like we have today, but you just kept consistently waking up and making that step, taking that step forward. Yeah.
John, one of the scariest things for me, and maybe your people can resonate with this, I was so terrified to take those first flowers to that florist. It plays out in your mind, why would they want my garden flowers? I'm going to walk in there, and they're going to take one look at my flowers and say, why do you think we'd pay you for that? And what I came to learn, literally, Steve Ziegler, my husband, had to almost drive me to the first call. I was that scared. He had to talk me down. This is how long ago it was. We had a bag phone. You probably don't even know what that is. That was the first cell phone that plugged in. It was in a bag. It looked like a regular desktop phone. You plugged it into the cigarette lighter. You barely had a cell signal. literally he's talking to me, yelling into the phone because I had it laying on the seat. It's like, go down there and take your flowers. And if they don't want them, we'll just never shop there again. It's like, what do you
Hmm.
think is going to happen to you? But let me tell you what I learned is that florists, event designers, the professional flower people, they know all about the stems that show up in their shops and boxes. They know nothing about the gorgeous flowers that we grow. They are going to think you're like Superman when you walk in there. I mean, it's like you are a superstar. You're the rock star when you bring these beautiful flowers in that you grew. And that's what enamors people with wanting flowers. And you just have to remember you're the maker of all that,
Hmm.
and it's just that's what really I was so afraid when Eddie turned around when he was on the phone with that customer and his eyes got as big as saucers and he said, "Hold, please, I'll buy it all." Those fears were squashed, you know?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
that went on for 25 years. Every shop I pulled up to, the shop people would run out to see what's in my van. Every week, the flower people that see flowers all day long, you know,
Hmm.
it's we have magic, and I just think we have to play that and to not be afraid. And that's easy to say, me, I'm afraid every day, doing new things, and but that's for real. Your flowers are so amazing to the rest of the world that you just have to bank on, trust the process. That's the
Hmm.
bottom line.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, very cool. Well, we'll switch gears here. Thanks for sharing that startup story. I think it's just really inspiring for people that are in the aspiring farming stage, or maybe they've started the farm and they're feeling a little disenfranchised coming into this next growing season here. I think it's good to have that inspiration of a success story. Not only that, but what you've been able to do over the past 25 years and the thousands of students you've been able to help get to that successful point. It's very inspiring. So thanks for taking the time to do that. Now I want to switch gears and just see if we can get some
Sure.
questions answered from our live Q&A here. So if anyone is watching now and they have any questions for Lisa, you can submit them online, ideally through our shared webinar space, but even on Instagram, if you're watching, you can comment there and we'll field some questions. But this first one comes from Lucy Brenton. Do you have a top 10 list of which flowers we should start with? Maybe depending on the market we are targeting, weddings, farmers markets, market wagon, etc.
Sure. So that's a great question, and it's a real loaded question. I will say that my target, I sold, to the mini markets. I never was a specific wedding provider, meaning to designers. And I literally sold the same flowers across all the markets that I served. I kind of became known as the production staple farmer. Staple flowers that professional flower people use every day of their business life. That's the way I figured that I was going to be able to sell my flowers every week. I don't want to have to depend on whether there's a wedding this weekend or not, right? And those same flowers were awesome at farmers markets and at every other market that I sold. It totally depends on what season you're in and where you are. But I will tell you just off the top of my head, those that are in my top 10 for the warm, of course, sunflowers, but I want to say for sunflowers, which are cash cows, when you grow them the proper size, which is much smaller than what most people do, they can be amazing. Sunflowers, zinnias, coxcomb, which is a celosia plumes. And then we mix with that is lemon basil as a filler. And then in the cool flower department, which is cool season hardy annuals, snapdragon, sweet William, feverfew, larkspur, and nigella. Those are just, I will tell you that in my books and on my website, we have an online garden shop, and the seeds that you see on my seed shop are the same seeds that I grow from. We don't grow seed, but those are the flowers that I have grown year after year for all of these years. I mean, the cash cows for us are still, people say, really? Sunflowers and zinnias? People love them. The commercial customers love them, So that would be my top 10 pick.
Okay. And then she also asks which flowers are easiest to grow and sell. It's probably the same, but just wanted
Yep.
to throw that out there. Yeah.
So one thing that people need to learn about me out of the gate is, while people think that flower farmers fuss over their flowers, nothing could be further from the truth. Only the strong survive here. The key is to grow strong growers that are cut flower varieties, treat them right, and give them what they need and harvest them on time. And they are naturally easy because they're vigorous growers when you give them what they need. And that's really what we kind of teach in our courses and in my books. It's like, I'm not going to give you a fish, I'm going to teach you how to fish. Once you figure out timing and how to make and how to choose the right flowers to grow in your season and environment, it's simple. They go by themselves. That's the way it should really work.
Okay. And then she also says, which ones are just too labor intensive that they aren't even worth it? I think you kind of alluded to that with the focusing on warm and cold season annuals.
So there are some plants. From what I get from what she's asking is who
Mhm.
is too needy, who needs too much work for the end
Mm.
return, and those are the first ones that get kicked off our list. But I will say that a lot of that is resolved with skill. With doing it over and over, it's a lot of times it's just not knowing the proper way to care for things or harvest them or support them in the garden, that kind of thing. But again, all the flowers that you see me talk about, write about, and teach about are those easy keeper flowers that sell.
Mm. Okay. And then she asked what secondary products might come from flowers, such as selling edibles like pansies and nasturtiums. I'm probably saying that wrong. Yeah.
I can't even say it now, John.
Yeah, I put it in your head. And then selling it to restaurants, maybe candulas to folks who might make healing salves.
Okay. So
Yeah,
she said calendula, healing salve. So there
salves.
are a lot of different things you can do, what we call perhaps added value products. That's like
Mhm.
taking your strawberries and making jam and selling it, right? It's that same deal. And funny enough, in the Flower Farmer Club, I do a monthly master class, and one of the master classes this past summer was what to do with your leftover flowers. And we dry them all. And we showed you how to do that and why we do that. And then this last fall, it's like, okay, now what do we do with all of these dried flowers? Because it's not quite as simple and clear and profitable as we might think. When you actually, we had a ton of dried flowers here. It's like, all right, what are we going to do with these? Are we going to make wreaths? That's a lot of work. That is a lot of work, a lot of labor.
Mhm.
And so our goal was always sell everything fresh. That's the least amount of handling, storing, holding, moving, shuffling, keeping it good. And so I did sell dried hydrangeas, and we've made things out of them. But unless that's a really big focus of your business and you learn to be streamlined and efficient, it never was very profitable. It turned out to be everyone's least favorite thing, and cost money instead of making money. So I
Mhm.
can't really comment on, edibles. You just have to do a lot of things differently because people are going to be eating those flowers. And that's not
Mhm.
something I'm familiar with. But there's not as many people eating flowers as there are people buying bouquets of flowers to take home. I do know
Mhm.
that.
Mhm. Yeah, and if you love growing flowers, sometimes in business we say like follow the flow of money, follow where your customers are and where the majority of them are, and make things a little more simplified and streamlined for your business. So
Exactly.
yeah. All right. And then over on Instagram, we have a question from someone. What's your recommendation to calm people's fears from buying directly? Sorry, yeah. I guess maybe their question is wholesale versus a local farmer. Why
I
would
mean,
they
from the
go with you?
customer's perspective, you think, or
I'm not sure what
read
they're
that
asking.
again?
What's your recommendation to I think they're trying to say calm people's fears from buying directly. As maybe my guess is that there are people's fears is that you're not going to be consistent, that your quality is not going to be there.
Okay.
And
So
yeah,
I
maybe those.
think, right. So we're saying the fear that a florist has from buying directly from a local farmer, perhaps questioning
Yeah,
quality.
seems like.
Again, that's where your first presentation of being professional and having a little bit of paperwork. And when I say paperwork, I just mean a way for them to contact you, maybe a list of what you're growing. You're not promising anybody anything. You're just saying, here's my crop plan, no prices. Here's the crop plan. This is my contacts, and this is how I will contact you. I'll contact you on whatever day, and then I'll follow up with a phone call. All of that reeks, man, this person knows what they're talking about. And woo, look at these samples, right?
Mhm.
So a lot of those fears are squashed by doing that. But I understand what they're saying because I serviced, actually, he ended up being one of my biggest customers for many years. If they've had experience with another local grower that wasn't really a professional, they perhaps didn't grow varieties that, like for instance, sunflowers. We only grow pollenless sunflowers. They still produce nectar for bees, but we're not feeding bees, right? Because pollenless sunflowers last longer, have stiffer necks, and they don't drop pollen all over their customers' tabletops. And if they bought pollen sunflowers, not knowing it previously, you're going to have to like prove to them, so you're having to overcome past people's behaviors. And you can do it by just being equipped, just knowing your stuff about what it is that you're growing and why you're growing it and how you conditioned it and giving them samples.
Mm-hmm. All right. And then Jake Kupris asks, what are the top 10 varieties you'd grow to be successful and not get overwhelmed in your first year?
So it's those same 10 that I've already listed, but there are
Mhm.
more. Both all the book, well, both Cut Flower Handbook really kind of shares all of those. But the number one thing you can do to not be overwhelmed is to start small. I actually say that in the Cut Flower Handbook that I can tell who's going to be successful pretty much out of the gate, whether it be one of my flower farming students or somebody I'm talking to. People that go big out of the gate, I can almost promise you, will not even probably survive the first full season, but they will never be back next year.
Hmm.
And when I say small, I mean, if you think you have an acre, you need to plant an eighth of that the first year. You need to learn how to grow commercially, which means weed prevention without chemicals, and how to plant intensively and how to support and harvest. And there's a lot of balls to juggle, and you have to learn them all. And if you have an acre of flowers, which, oh, so many people do that, and it's like you will never come up for air. You will never make it. So starting small and doing it right and impressing those customers, and do like I did, have more customers than you have flowers. There is no better disease in the world to have.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's really good. It's just people's mindsets coming into it. You start too big, get overwhelmed, get burned out, and then now we've lost a potential flower farmer who could have supported their local community. So it's unfortunate, but I think, yeah, starting small, maybe even with the mindset of I'm going to be aggressive and grow these things, start telling my community about it, even if I just give away whatever I harvest every week. You're starting. I think people get so scared, but all it takes to become a farmer is to grow something, hand it to somebody, and they give you money for it. If that happens one time, you're officially a farmer. Like,
That's
keep it
right. First
simple.
20 bucks will turn you on. And
Yeah.
John, the other part of that is I think, and I am still surprised after all these years for myself, people just cannot imagine how many flowers a small space produces.
Mhm.
And when you grow the right varieties and grow them right and harvest them hard, you just will not believe how many flowers you have.
Mhm.
And you don't need a big garden, first off. And I think that's the misleading part of all of this. Smaller is definitely better in flower farming.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. And then Laura Hawthorne asks pros and cons for wholesale versus retail.
Sure. So wholesale, so everybody understands what that means. That means you're going to be selling it to somebody that's then going to resell it to somebody else. Like you sell to a florist and they're reselling it to a retail customer, the end person, the person that's going to drop it in a vase on their in their home, and then the retail customer is that customer. So, I started out as a wholesaler to florists strictly in the beginning. Because remember, I was terrified of ever making a bouquet. I was so afraid that I could never do that. So I just sold bunches to florists. And there was, first off, yes, you make less money for individual stems. However, when you price professionally and properly, the price that we charged our florist was more than a lot of people I see even charging at farmers markets, because they're so undercutting everybody and everything. But what you have to remember when you're comparing these two markets is, for a wholesaler, I sold all my flowers from home on Monday, called them up, got their orders, packed the truck, and went and took it to them. At the end of the week, I did farmers markets. So I'm a great one to compare this, right? Farmers markets took a day and a half to prepare to go to the farmers market, because we had 4 tents and about 40 buckets of flowers, and we had to make a ton of bouquets, and you have to put up all that stuff. And keep in mind, I'm in Virginia. It's 95 degrees with 100% humidity. And it was just craziness. And you just pray it didn't rain, or that there was a parade and there was no customers there that day. So I might have made more, but you spend more in labor and time and blood, sweat, and tears. So you have to really weigh your what is important to you. Time was important to me. Wholesaling really worked. And it's so funny. I've become really good friends with Lynn Bazinski, the woman that started us all in flower farming. And she and I have talked about how you go full circle. You first start flower farming and you're selling a farmer's market, and you realize it's great, but it's a lot of work. And then you discover selling to florists, and everybody's like, oh, make as much money, but this seems a little easier. Then you find another way to sell. Then you find another way. And by the time you retire, you have gone full circle back to that first thing that perhaps you weren't sure about, but now it's the best way to go. And for me, that was selling to florists. Volume, least amount of work, least amount of inputs. And you don't have to sell them over and over again. Those people know who you are. They're waiting for your list. You don't have to tell people why your flowers are so amazing, because they're local. You know what I mean? At the farmer's market, you have steadies, but you have to sell a lot of new people too, every sinking week. So it just is really what's available to you. And if you are a young family, when do farmers markets happen? On the weekends. That is not usually a very good time for families to be working. So it really depends on where it fits for your life. I loved florists because they were Monday through Friday. We didn't work on the weekends after we gave up farmers markets.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's really good perspective. You've been there and done that, so you kind of have good advice there. This kind of flows into what we were just talking about, but she also asks, what's the highest return per flower for effort and cost of those enterprises?
Well, not of those enterprises. The highest dollar per stem that you can get in flower farming is becoming a farmer florist. That is a grower that also does events using their own flowers, because you are the grower, the middleman, meaning the wholesaler person, and the end result. So that's definitely the highest dollar, but it is the most intense, highest labor demand, and pretty stressful. For us, when it was all said and done, I still feel like florists were our biggest bill. And we had a huge members only market, which is like a farmer's market here on my farm, but it was private because I didn't want strangers coming to my property. So that was retail, and it was customers that knew us and knew our stuff. So I didn't have to, they were clamoring. It was cat fights in here on certain, 4th of July week. And we had red, blue, and white flowers. There would literally be mature professional women in here eyeballing each other as they were running towards the red flowers. So we got a little bit of it all, and then bouquet subscriptions. But day after day, for me, florists were the ticket, because I serviced 3 high volume florists for 2 decades. And I just sent them a list every week. They just took the cream
Mhm.
off the top and we just packed it and delivered it, and they knew they could rely on us and I knew I could rely on them because they paid their bill. It's just a very different scenario, but we did them all. It just really depends on your life and what timing you actually have available.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. And then Lucy Brenton asks, do you sell potted flowers or seedlings, etc.?
I went down that road too. That's kind of right up there with them dried flowers. It seems like such a great idea. But no, we tried it
Mm,
years ago. First off, it's not as easy as it looks to start and maintain seedlings to look good enough for people to pay you for them. I mean, you just can't imagine how much treatment the plants that we buy at nurseries get with. They get fertilizer in every watering,
mm,
every watering. They often get treated for pests. And that's what keeps them looking green and beautiful when people buy them. My full circle about all of that, of doing things other than selling fresh flowers, is it just distracts you from the focus of what your business is. And it's different. I have a really great friend, Amy's Organic Garden. Anybody that wants to, she's a vegetable and a flower grower. They have huge business. I mean, huge business. And she does a plant sale in Maymont in Richmond, Virginia in May. And they do a ton of money in 4 hours, but that's a huge established plant sale. People come there to buy their plants. For a flower farmer to just plunk some plants down in their booth alongside the flowers, perhaps maybe not so beneficial. Amy does. I am staggered when she tells me what they do for that 4 hour sale. It takes her 2 months to get it ready,
mm,
but that's a different forecast, different people that are there coming for that. So I say stick to your game. Don't get distracted and put all of your energy into what your focus is, because there's no ceiling on this business. It's just you haven't found your people, and most of us quit before we succeed, and it's
mhm.
because of taking all these little side roads.
Yeah, yeah. And then she also asks, is it possible to have a year-round business?
Yeah, funny you should say that. So that's kind of how it started for me. Started growing probably maybe the second or third year in from flower farming, so I've been growing and selling to florists. One local garden club lady learned about me. That she saw sweet peas at her florist, and she knew they had to come from somewhere locally. And she tracked me down and she said, "Would you come and speak to my garden club?" And I said, "Well, sure, but I can only do it like November through February. That's out of harvest season." And so that's what really launched the gardener's workshop. I started speaking to these clubs, master gardeners and garden clubs. They just want to hear what you're doing. You don't have to be thinking that you're some pro, sharing some super tips that nobody's ever heard before. These people just want to hear the basics or just hear about what you're doing. And so I started speaking, and in the off season, and that became, that's what grew the Gardener's Workshop into what it is today. So that just kind of evolved. And so the first 3 years, I would just charge them a fee. And then I would also promote my flower business, about my members only market and what farmers markets I was at or where they could get my flowers. And I'd always give away a gift certificate for some free flowers, that they would have to come and redeem from somewhere. And it all just worked out. And so that just kind of evolved. And then I thought, shoot, I need to sell the stuff that I'm teaching them about. And that's what kind of launched the Gardener's Workshop into what it is today. But even my grower friends that have hoop and greenhouses, growing year round is incredibly intensive financially. You have to have a lot of heat and a lot of light to actually get something to bloom in the wintertime. So the thoughts of doing that, most flower farmers actually use tunnels to extend their season. Think dahlias, just amazing. Think how long you could maybe grow dahlias in the fall if you had them under cover to protect them from those first few light frosts. Oftentimes, for us anyway, we'll get some light frosts and that'll darken it, that'll damage everything, and then it gets warm again. So you can extend your season and start your season perhaps even earlier. But we don't grow during the season. And I think that there is such an opportunity in so many things to piggyback on flower farming that could be at least educated on in the winter months, to learn about. But learning to become a flower farmer, truly the basics. I'm not even sure where I was talking the other day. And speaking of how most people just blow past the basics that they just don't think that they need. But those basics are the foundation. And then that foundation is what you can just build so many different flower related businesses, whether it's workshops, speaking, teaching. I mean, there's just really a lot of different things you can actually engage in when you feel confident in your ability to actually grow. And so that is one of probably the most unsung, really great benefits of being an experienced flower farmer. There's a lot of things you can piggyback on.
Yeah. Yeah, and then we're getting towards the last 10 minutes here. So if anyone has questions, be sure to submit them either through our webinar or through Instagram. But another question here too is from Anita Martin. I would love to know what kind of flowers could be grown alongside regular market garden produce to attract pollinators, beneficial insects, as well as providing additional income stream. I'm guessing Anita is maybe a market gardener selling vegetable produce from her farm already and is looking to add flowers.
Sure, and that's a really great question. I actually wrote a book called Vegetables Loves Flowers, and it's not, it's about vegetables just being in the presence of flowers and all the good stuff that flowers attract. It's not about companion planting like people think, plant this to prevent that. It's really restoring the natural order of your garden, and really all of the flowers that we've been talking about here. It's growing the right varieties, those that have tall stems, that are very abundant, that are, if it's an issue, perhaps pollenless, like the sunflowers, and having that cutting garden right in your vegetable patch. So it's twofold. You'll benefit, you'll be harvesting those flowers right alongside when you're harvesting your vegetables. You're going to take a bucket of water out into your garden and cut the flowers at the same time. And the flowers, when you cut, just like vegetables, I love it when vegetable farmers and gardeners want to have a cutting garden. It's like a cutting garden is just like a vegetable patch. The more you harvest it, the more it produces, right? Just like with herbs. And so the more you cut it, the more it's going to produce. And having it in your vegetable patch just makes that super easy and convenient. And we are big fans of native bees. We have a huge community here on our farm. And we also, our neighbors have some honeybees down the road that come and spend some time here. But we really love the pollinators. And oftentimes after a crop, if I have the space and a flower crop is kind of starting to not produce as good of flowers as I want, whether the stems get shorter or the flowers are just getting smaller and smaller because maybe their season is kind of coming to an end, we often will leave the flowers in the garden for those pollinators. I particularly love doing that with Daucus, which is a variety of Queen Anne's lace that we grow, called Dara. The hoverflies and parasitic wasps. There are just hundreds of them in there. So flowers would be a great complement to your vegetable patch for sure. And your vegetable customers will absolutely love it too.
All right, great. And then we also have a question. We've got time for probably maybe two or three more, but this one comes from Andrea Barker, interested in marketing in a rural area. My nearest city is 1+ hour away. My zone is 6B. What flowers do you recommend? This is kind of a common theme I'm getting in these questions is I'm a little bit more rural. There's not a lot of big cities right next to me. How do I still grow flowers and sell them?
Sure. And so, um, you know, you really would have to do, I mean, is there a farmer's market? Probably not a really strong market if you don't have a lot of foot traffic. I know growers that travel 2 hours to get to big markets, that go to big cities to sell to florists. I mean, I know when I was at the Williamsburg Farmers Market, I will still never forget Becky and Lawrence drove 2.5 hours every Saturday each way because it was a great it was worth their time. And so, one of the models that that we follow, that members only market, one of my students took that members only market and made it mobile, meaning that you would go, you pre-sell your flowers like like a CSA basically, and you go and set up wherever the customers are. Like in that city, you would have a pre-destination place that you have approval. A lot of times it's in a professional park where they're closed in the evening, where you show up, take out your tables, set up your stuff, and your customers that have already prepaid, they're CSA type customers, zoom in and pick up their flowers. Yeah, it's an hour and a half away, but if you have your flowers sold or you have a florist route, you just have to make that commitment. And I mean, you have to do footwork. You have to go out and visit where you're talking about and see how many flower shops are there, and go in and do a little research and just say, do y'all buy local flowers? Like you're considering them as maybe using them, and just doing some market research, and seeing what kind of stuff they sell and how many and watch. Is this a happening place? Do they do a lot of weddings? How many weddings do y'all do? Do y'all do a lot of weddings? And just ask some questions. All you need for florist is 2 or 3 really good customers to make it well worth the drive. And it doesn't happen overnight, so rural areas, you just have to say, all right, am I going to really target a market and drive? But you have to really tackle it hard. And I know people doing that, and it can be very successful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good. Those are great tips. It's all about just kind of identifying your what sales channel you want to focus on, and then are they interested? So yeah, can I tap into that market and do your research? Talk to those people. Don't be afraid to ask, and don't be afraid to investigate. Kind of like you were saying, you would stalk the florists before you would sell to
Yep.
them and eventually have them as customers. Do some of that stalking. Go to that garden center that has a florist in the corner and see who they're selling to and what they're selling and how often, and then bring some samples. It sounds like, and introduce yourself.
Yep.
But okay, we'll get into this next question. This might be our last one here, but let's see. This is from Serenity Michelle. She asks, my husband and I want to create a sunflower farmstead, but have gumbo soil. We needed to heal it first with some chickens and cows, and now we're almost ready to plant in the spring. Curious how sunflowers thrive. How much water retention is too much? Are there some hacks without having to add expensive drains? Eastern Iowa.
So do you think she's saying she has wet soil?
I'm not sure what she meant by gumbo soil, but yeah, it sounds like she's considering growing sunflowers, and then she's worried about too much water retention and installing professional drains underground.
Hmm. Yeah. Spending time cover cropping a soil like that would be really, really helpful. There's lots of great cover crops that are really good at breaking up. They're called groundhog radishes. They're daikon radishes, and they call them groundhog radishes because they go deep and make little crevices, which you're looking for a way for your water to get away. Not many plants really like to have their roots saturated all the time. Sunflowers are pretty feisty, you know, they're pretty good growers, but they need full sun, pretty decent drainage, and they'll grow without strong fertility, but they also will grow better with fertility. And by a sunflower farm, I'm not sure if you're talking about like a sunflower maze. And, you know, I would say the only way you're going to figure it out is to plant them. So we grow, and you can find it on our website. We have the details. We sell a sunflower cover crop. It's not the same sunflowers that we would use for cutting because it produces tons of pollen because we plant them for the pollinators, and it's beautiful, right? Is to get some sunflower cover crop sunflower seeds and plant them and see what happens. Don't plant the whole farm, obviously, but plant a 50-pound bag and see what happens and see where you are. And that's, you know, so many times I find people need assurance that stuff is going to succeed before they start. And I'm telling you, friends, you just have to do it for yourself. You just have to put your foot in and go for it. And you know what? If it's a fail, what a great lesson. Now you know it's not going to work. Move on to the next thing. And nothing is a sure bet. I mean, nothing is a sure bet even after you've done it for 3 decades. You know, stuff still happens. So I'd say you just need to buy some cover crop sunflower seed and give it a whirl and see what happens. And I wish you the best of luck.
Mhm. Very cool. Well, thanks again for taking the time. As far as for Farmstead Revival, we have another live Q&A coming up with farmer Joel Salton in February. He had to reschedule. We were supposed to do that last month, but it's going to be next month. So be sure to check in and get on our list for signing up to be part of that live Q&A in February. But yeah, thanks again for taking the time. I want to open the door to you, Lisa, and how can people follow up with you if they want to learn more about flower farming?
Sure. So we call home base is thegardenersworkshop.com. You can connect with us over there. That is the home to our library of online courses for, you know, the budding home gardener to the beginner flower farmer and the flower farmer that wants to grow their business, as well as a fully stocked online garden shop that sells the same tools, seeds, and supplies that I teach about and what I use here on my farm, as well as my books. Would love to sign one for you. And you can also learn about the Flower Farmer Club, which is my private membership over at thegardenersworkshop.com. And would just love to, you know, walk alongside you. As I kind of say to people now, it's like there is so much knowledge out there. But what most of us are missing is the grit, gumption to actually do it. And that's kind of my specialty, is just helping people push the envelope and take the plunge to see that they can do it. And that's what we're all about. And we'd love to have you join us over at thegardenersworkshop.com. And we do a live show every Friday inside our phone app, Gardener's Workshop Shop, where it's like, think of QVC, but it's with me selling my stuff and demonstrating how we use it. And you'll find that at 12 noon on Fridays. And you can find our app inside your phone's app store. It's free, and we would love to have you download it and check it out and join me for a live show because we love doing it.
Yeah, I think that's so cool. You guys are kind of the one-stop shop for everything flowers. So whether you're a gardener, aspiring flower farmer, or an established one, it's really impressive. Even the things that you guys sell, it's been vetted on a farm that's been around for 25 years. So the seeds and the tools and supplies you guys sell, it's been tested and approved by someone that's been there and done that, right? So much easier for someone that's overwhelmed with a giant seed catalog and what do I do next, which is the most important tool. You guys have done that vetting, and that's what you have on your online store. So thanks for taking the time. And yeah, if you want to follow up with Lisa, be sure to check out thegardenersworkshop.com. Thanks.
Thank you, John.
Bye.
Ciao.